because impulse control, I don't know her. It becomes a Starling home, not just the Starling House. And like his abs go for days. Kudos to the author because like made me feel a little nauseous at times. Hey friends, it's Sarah and it is officially spooky season. So next week is Halloween, so I thought that for this video I would recommend some books for spooky season. Most of these are not super scary books because I frighten very easily and I don't read scary stuff because I will have incredibly vivid nightmares. So I don't really do that. That being said, this year I did read a horror book, but we'll get to that later. So if you're a little baby like me, you should be able to read all these books with no problem. Most of these are like pretty cozy, fun, like just like witchy fall vibes. So if you enjoy the more tame aspects of Halloween, then these books might be for you. Now that we've acquired a sweet kitten, oh yes, what's our first book, Parsnip? So first up is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. I've talked about this book before. I can't remember which video it's in, but I will figure that out and link it up top and in the description of this video. But basically this is a super cozy, like witchy romance. It features a witch who feels like she doesn't really like fit in. The witches in this world are supposed to like not really gather, and so it's a pretty like isolating experience, and she has somewhat recently lost the last member of her family, so she's kind of feeling like a little adrift. When she ends up answering an ad for a like magical tutor basically for these little witch girls who live in this secluded estate with basically like the house staff. She goes and joins this household and it just has like very lovely little like found family vibes. There's a romance in it with the kind of like standoffish librarian. You have like a little grumpy sunshine pairing. And it really just has like kind of that feeling of like the house in the cerulean sea. It's not quite that saccharine. And overall, it's just very sweet and cozy. Has like those perfect fall vibes. This one was a 4-star read for me. The author has another book coming out next year, which I'm super excited about as well. That's kind of along the same like cozy fantasy vibes. So really pumped for that as well. Up next is Witch of Wild Things by Racquel, Vasquez, Gililland. I've read a couple of this author's teen books before, but this is her adult romance debut. And this follows Sage, who has 2 sisters, one of whom passed in a tragic accident and is now haunting Sage. Oh, and all the sisters have different magical powers. That's like their family is cursed with all the women in their family having different gifts. So she's being haunted by her dead sister. She's trying to kind of deal with that while, you know, being a witch in the world. She ends up doing kind of like botany work and has to work with the guy who broke her heart several years ago when they were teenagers. So it's a second chance romance. It's got some really interesting family dynamics. All of this author's books deal with these ideas of like kind of how families hurt each other and how they can kind of repair their relationships. In this, the main character has like really been wronged by her family and been forced to grow up too quickly and kind of be like a parent to her sisters. And the person who's supposed to be their guardian is just kind of like let her take over and hasn't been there to support her when she was a child. So there's a lot of like family healing going on in this. And so even though it's like a second chance romance, it's also kind of like a second chance family relationship. So it's just a lot of like kind of healing and forgiveness. And then of course all these like romantic feelings she's feeling for the guy. It is a little bit of the like, he's so muscular and strong and like his abs go for days, but it's fine. It's not too bad. This one was 3.5 stars for me. It felt a little like exaggerated at times, like the one sister was so awful to Sage. It definitely feels a little bit like a older sister's fantasy it's not like a revenge fantasy, but it does have that kind of, you know, they're all wrong, she's all right, and she's finally getting recognized for her contributions to the family, which is lovely. It's a bit of a wish fulfillment, and it's great. And this again, it's like, it got witches, but it's not super like spooky or Halloween-y. It's like kind of like a late summer, early autumn kind of feel to it. Up next, getting like a little bit spookier, is Alix E. Harrow's Starling House. I read The Once and Future Witches by this author, loved it. I read her little shorts, duology, Mirror Mended, and I can't remember the other one's called. Those were also great. And so when I saw that this was the staff pick of the month, I decided to buy it because impulse control, I don't know her. And I'm so glad I did. This was excellent. This was a 5-star read. This follows Opal, who is trying to take care of her younger brother after their parents have died. She's in her mid-20s and he's like 16, so she's trying to get him through high school, and she's trying to like get enough money together to get him out of this town because they lived in this little like coal mining town. A little bit of like a dead end town kind of vibes, like no future here, and she loves her brother, so she's trying to like get him out of there. And in this town there is the Starling House, which is a haunted house. It's kind of creepy. There are all sorts of weird rumors about it. No one ever sees the occupants, or very rarely sees the occupants, and it's all very mysterious. But one day she ends up taking a job being like kind of a housekeeper for the current occupant in the Starling House, and starts to like unravel the mysteries and figure out like why she's been dreaming about this super mysterious haunted house. It starts off a little bit spooky. It's kind of creepy at first, but then as Opal kind of like gets into this world, it feels a lot less scary. Like I definitely was reading this at night and was like, oh god, terrifying. But then as Opal gets more familiar with the world and we get more familiar with the world, it's less scary and more like, I don't know, like it starts to feel like a home, because she's so desperately looking for a home and acceptance, and she is always taking care of other people, but she needs someone to like take care of her. And the characters in this book just like destroyed me a little bit. Opal's trying so hard. She's kind of that like scrappy, like alley cat kind of vibes, like where she's like desperate to be loved, but also has like had to harden against the world and is fighting for her family and for what she loves, but just needs someone to like take her inside and feed her and like pet her and soothe her, so she can be the wonderful house cat that she deserves to be. And that was a weird tangent. Also, this book is just beautiful. So like, I mean, that cover, incredible, stunning. But there's also a few like full page illustrations in this, which is excellent. And then all the pages have this little like border around them, and it's kind of written like a history. So there are like some footnotes in here. So if you've ever read or heard of like the House of Leaves, it has a very like fine hint of that going through it, of this like mysterious house that kind of like moves around and things shift within it and it feels sentient. But whereas House of Leaves, it feels very like malevolent, in the Starling House it becomes a Starling home, not just the Starling House. But it does have like those footnotes of like referencing whatever she's mentioning, which is fun. I love a footnote in a book where it kind of breaks the fourth wall and you're like, ooh, maybe it's real. It feels like a real document. I really love this. I think this is a perfect kind of Halloween spooky book. It's a little bit of a gothic romance. You've got these two characters who kind of like butt heads. They're both very stubborn. It's like two alley cats like facing off and being like, "Rrr." But then they start to soften up and open up and just care for each other. Ugh, it's wonderful. I'm like almost tempted to reread this now that I've been talking about it. I'm like, maybe I should read it again. It was really good. On the romance in this is really lovely as well. Alix E. Harrow had mentioned at some point that I think was the part she was worried most about, is like that and the horror, that she was like uncertain. But I think she did both of those super well. And yeah, the romance in here had me like kicking my little feet and like giggling at the book, even though they're like these like tough little stray feral children. They're not even children, they're like my age, but these like feral wounded souls, but they're also like, ugh, they're so sweet together, and I just want them to be happy forever in their Starling home. Also, there is like an actual feral cat in this who's great. They just call her the Hellcat the whole time, but I love her, and I'm unreasonably attached to her. One thing that I forgot to say, she writes like very beautifully, so if you are looking for something that has really like beautiful writing without being like overly flowery, Alix Harrow. She's got good stuff. Also her newsletter. I read her newsletter and I'm like, oh, I'm always so taken aback by how beautifully she writes about pretty mundane things. So if you're not subscribed to her newsletter, I guess I'm plugging her newsletter now, but it's really good. I really enjoy every time it pops up in my email inbox. I'm like, oh, exciting. It's like a whole new little, story from one of my favorite authors. Is she gonna be an auto-buy author? I think she might be turning into an auto-buy author for me. Okay, I gotta stop talking about this book or this whole video is just gonna be me raving about how great that book is. Anyways, you should read this. It's really good. So now we're getting into like actual kind of horror-y books. So up next I have You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Bayron, who is the author of Cinderella is Dead. I've read a few of her books before and I've always found them kind of like medium. I always want to like them a lot because she always has like sapphic black female main characters, which I love, but they just always, there's something that I'm just not quite vibing with. Maybe it's her writing style, but I actually enjoyed this one the most of all of her books, which surprised me because it is a YA horror kind of like slasher, not movie book. And I'm giving this one 3.5 stars. This is basically set at this camp that is almost like an escape room kind of. So our main character Charity works at Camp Mirror Lake where they have this game set up that mimics a like super popular or like a cult classic slasher film set at this camp. So she and her colleagues are kind of like actors and they create this experience for guests to come and pretend that they're in the movie and like run away from the bad guy and people get killed, and like it's basically like a big play that's immersive. And so it's the end of the season, they've done all this, and as they're starting to like wind down the season, coworkers start to go missing and things get like super bizarre. Something's just not right at this camp. And there ends up being like a killer on the loose, and it's a slasher, and it's this whole thing. I really enjoyed, especially the first half of this book. I really liked the idea of this kind of like camp that's a murder game reenactment play thing. I thought was really interesting. The second half takes a very different turn than expected. Although, and I've heard a lot of people not really enjoy the like kind of hard right turn that it takes, but I thought it was kind of interesting. My complaint with it is I think it could have been longer. It's only 228 pages, and the ending and that like turn felt kind of like rushed, and then we just kind of like ran through the end of it. And I think if it had been extended a little bit longer, there would have been more of that suspense and it would have been scarier, because in this it felt very like, I guess, kind of thrilling, and it was like exciting, and there was a lot of like action, and it was intense, and there was like a little bit of kind of gore, but I wasn't really scared reading it. It was just kind of thrilling. So if you want to kind of like dip a toe into like a slightly scary teen book, I feel like this is a good one because it's like action packed, it's kind of high paced, there's like some suspense, especially in the beginning when you're not sure what's going on and why things are all weird, but I don't think it's like too scary. There is a lot of like, stupid adults, why are you leaving these children alone? But that's a teen book for you. Then I want to talk about Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. Yeah, that Chuck Tingle. If you know, you know. But this is his second horror book that has been, and it is one that's been traditionally published. It is also kind of set around a camp. But the idea here is that our main character lives in this really small religious town that has like their own religion. It's like something made up that's branched off of Christianity. And the town is really famous for, and like all their money comes from Camp Damascus, which is like the most successful gay conversion camp in the US slash maybe the world. They have 100% conversion rate. They send all the gay kids there and turn them straight. So our main character like lives in this town, is religious, and then she starts seeing weird things. She starts seeing like this creepy lady with like long stringy hair and really long arms and like fingers and white eyes. And she's like, what the heck is going on? And so she's trying to unravel why she's seeing this like weird demonic lady. Her memory's like going weird, and she's trying to figure out what the heck is going on, and no one in her life, especially not the adults, are taking her seriously. And this was, I don't know if it was scary. I wasn't that scared, to be honest. This is another, I would say like 3, maybe 3.5 stars. It was kind of like unsettling, and there were parts of it later on that were kind of gory and like gross, I would say. But I wasn't really scared reading it. It was more, again, I guess kind of thrilling. Not even quite that, but it was just kind of like mysterious. Like, what happened? What's going on? What is this camp doing to people? And my one big complaint with it was the writing style. I felt was reminded me a lot of like poorly written fan fiction at times. For example, there was a lot of different words instead of said. So maybe like he snarled viciously, she exclaimed softly, and every single like dialogue tag was one of those instead of having said more frequently. So those like really stood out to me because that felt like how I used to write when I was writing stories. And it's not, it's not terrible, but you need to have said in there a bit because that kind of like blends into the background and isn't as noticeable and makes dialogue flow a little bit better. So that was something that kind of like irritated me a little bit. But I will say once the action and like things started happening and the pace picked up, which was fairly early on in the book, then I didn't really notice the writing style so much. So like that was good. It was just kind of like the first little bit when like not much is happening and she's in her thoughts and just kind of living her life, that I was like, oh, this writing. But if you can get past that, then like the rest of the book's pretty action-packed, and I didn't notice the writing anymore. So that was really interesting. It also deals a lot with kind of like religious trauma and deconstructing all of these like religious ideas that have been indoctrinated into you, and trying to figure out like, what do I do once this community has kind of like turned its back on me and it's all I've ever known and I've discovered that it's wrong. So yeah, I thought that those were like super interesting parts of the book as well, which I didn't expect there to be that much of. I don't know why, but I was expecting just straight horror, but there's also this, yeah, kind of like unraveling of a belief system that's so core to your identity. That was really interesting to read about too. Last year, I read Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. I feel like I've talked about this in another video before, but I can't remember which one and I couldn't find it. So I'm just going to talk about it in this one. This was a 4-star read for me. It's a YA horror, and this one really freaked me out. It's very like a body horror kind of thing. So basically it's like the apocalypse has happened. It was like this big kind of religious apocalypse. There's this religious cult that our main character is trying to escape from. He's a trans boy and they like won't acknowledge his pronouns and his name and all that sort of stuff. So he's trying to escape them. They're also trying to turn him into like a weapon to fight these big creature things. So he's trying to escape, and he ends up joining up with this group of like teenagers in the like outside world. And it's like post-apocalyptic, religious trauma, queer identity, plus like body horror like crazy. I'm trying to remember exactly what they called it, but what they had done to him to try and kind of turn him into a weapon, like a bioweapon sort of, makes him kind of like liquefy from the inside out. So you have all these like really graphic descriptions of like him like throwing up blood and more, and it was real freaky. It was very graphic. It was almost too much for me. So like if you're looking for a real like bloody, gory kind of book, this is the one. It was very good, and it was very effective, and I did enjoy it. It was just a lot. It was a lot for me. But I did manage to make it through. So I think most people would be able to read it. It might just be kind of like at the limit of what you can tolerate, because whew, very vivid. Kudos to the author, because like made me feel a little nauseous at times. So those are all of the books that I would recommend for this spooky season. Most of them are fairly tame, and even the less tame ones are still really tame. You can do it. If I can read them, you can read them. I believe in you. Let me know what you're reading this spooky season. There's still a few days left before Halloween, so if you've got any recommendations, let me know, and I'll see if I can sneak them in before October 31st. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time. Now go read a book. What's the you came in, I'm in your walls? It's me. Here she is. Oh, and just something's not right. It's right. Hey friends, it's Sarah. Well, that sounded so sad. It's a horror slasher book. Phew, this is tough to say.